haumie, huia i taikie. He ha te hau e wawara mai, e wawara mai. He tiu he raki, he tiu he raki. Nāna ia mai te puputara ki he kiota. E tikina atu e au te kōtū koe i te pauwhakairo ka tū ki te Waitemata. Ioku wairangi e. Ati he wā mauri ora. Iaku nui, iaku rahi, iaku raukura ahurei, ko rangi tā mirotia nei, i roti te whakaaro kotahi. Nau mai, haere mai, a whakatau mai. Nau mai ki tēnei pō whakahirihira, ki tēnei hui nui whakaharahara, ki te whakanui e nei pūkinga, e nei mātanga, e nei rangatira. Hara mai i roti te karanga o Waipapa Taumata rau. Hara mai. A whakatau mai i roti te manaakitanga o Ngāti Whātua o Rākei, ki te pukopū o Tāmaki Makaurau. I roti au a manaakitanga. Whakatau mai, a whakatau mai. Ka huri ki a rātou, ko whitirangitia. I tangi hotu hotu, i roti o mātou manawa ki tēnei wā. E ngā mate katoa, haere, haere, haere atu rā. Rātou ki a rātou, e noho pūmau ki o mātou manawa. A tātou ki a tātou, ki tēnei ao tūroa, ko whakarau kia mai nei ki tēnei hui nui o tātou. E oku hoa, he mihi nui ki a koutou katoa. Nōku te hōnare ki te tuku mihi ki a koutou, I mua i tēnei kaupapa o tātou ki tēnei whare a tāhua. E tū ana hau ki te whāriki hia, te koro ai manaaki, ki o tātou raukura ahurei hou, ki o tātou raukura ahurei tōmua, me o mātou whānau, me ngā hoa kotai, ki konei. E pupuri ana mātou i Waipapa Taumata rau ki te mauri o tēnei whakatauki. Whai ia te iti kahurangi, me tū ohu koe, me he maunga teitei. E aku hoa, i rioto i tērā kōrero, whai a tērā taumata. Kia tata, kia whakamau ai kia tīna. Nā reira, kia pai tō tātou pō, a tēnā koutou, a tēnā tātou katoa. Hoi anō, ka huri taku whakaaro ki tō tātou rangatira, tō tātou ihorangi, a Dawn Freshwater, ki te tuku mihi ki o koutou, ki te pōtū nei, a hakoa te tō muri mai, o enei kupi i muri o mai i ahau, kei te mihi ki a tātou katoa. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Auckland, Professor Dawn Freshwater.
Kia ora koutou, nau mai, haere mai. Distinguished guests, award winners and their families, donors, alumni and friends of the university, welcome to the University of Auckland 2021 Distinguished Alumni Awards event. This year marks 25 years since we held the first Distinguished Alumni Awards event, and as we look forward to the next 25 years of excellence, we're thrilled that you can be here with us this evening as the past meets the future in the present. Tonight's award is aptly named Taumata, Place of Many Peaks, derived from our university Māori name, Waipapa Taumata Rau, gifted to us by Ngāti Whātua Waraaki. Not only will the past and the future meet here in the present tonight, science will also meet performance. Law will also meet engineering. And art will also meet the heart, as we take this evening to thank you, to congratulate you, and to celebrate you. Excellence is never an accident. It's always intentional. Māori ora kia koutou. Have a wonderful evening. Let's meet our winners.
Our host for this evening, University of Auckland alumnus Finlay MacDonald.
Good evening, welcome and thank you Vice-Chancellor to what is the first of these events until we were so rudely interrupted last year. It's a great pleasure to be here yet again as your host at what I think has become a fantastic and enduring night in the university calendar. Before we were so rudely interrupted, we were quite a long way down the path of planning for this celebration of some very distinguished alumni. Mostly that hasn't changed, but those of you who've attended a few of these evenings will notice some changes to our format. But veterans of this evening will also know this isn't an overly reverent affair. What it most certainly is, however, is an opportunity to meet some extraordinary people and hear a little about their extraordinary lives and careers. Before we begin, can I just remind you one more time to check your mobile phones are off or muted. You are, of course, welcome to take pictures. This is my 9th time hosting this event. It would have been my 10th, but who's counting? In that time, I've interviewed, I need to take a deep breath now, painters, bankers, CEOs, sailors, politicians, doctors, writers, entrepreneurs, musicians, scientists, broadcasters, lawyers, architects, athletes, engineers, actors, Paralympians, and even All Blacks. As well as their multifarious careers and everything that goes with that, our distinguished alumni have been of all ages, ethnicities, and backgrounds. So as well as these awards honouring alumni who have made outstanding contributions to their communities and to their professions and to their nation, this is also a celebration of diversity. And we're also acknowledging something quite profound, I think, this evening. The ability of teaching and a good education to not only allow individuals to reach their potential, but to benefit their communities in general. Looking at the biographies of the 2021 distinguished alumni, I am struck, yet again, by the way their ability to keep learning clearly hasn't ended with their formal education. Obviously, they've been dedicated to their chosen paths, but they've also taken unexpected turns, faced challenges, found success that can never really be predicted at the outset of studying for a degree or getting that first job. Now, we can talk about ambition and goal setting, but we should also talk about resilience, imagination, and adaptation, and I look forward to doing that in just a minute. This year, our distinguished alumni are from the worlds of architecture, business, health, the arts, and the law. Each of their stories touches at some crucial stage on their time at Auckland University, and it's wonderful to have them back here again and to celebrate their achievements. So, without further ado, it's time to meet our first recipient and very distinguished alumna.
She is searingly clever. She has almost boundless energy, and I can tell you from personal experience, she's exhausting. She's brave, informed by the values she brings to her work. She's not afraid to manifest those values in the way she acts and what she writes as a judge. Helen cares a great deal about people, and about the work of the law in the lives of people.
She's taught me, above all else, about the importance of kindness. There's something that she always said when I was growing up that I'm only just starting to understand. Kindness is what helps you move through the world, what helps you make a difference, and that you should treat every person you meet with respect and compassion. And I think that's the most important thing anyone could ever teach a person.
If there'd been a prize for most likely to be appointed Chief Justice 30 odd years ago, then she would have won it. It was obvious from the first day that she was going to be the best student in her year and that she was going to be extraordinarily successful. One of Helen's principal concerns has always been access to justice, and she's done a lot in terms of improving access to justice over a large number of years now.
She's always thinking about how it can be better for the young women that follow her. Just seeing women in high places doesn't mean that everyone else can ascend to them too. You need those women to be actively working for change, and I think that she does that every day. The perception of my mum amongst my peers is profound admiration. She's admired by the people that will one day be the profession that she's shaping. And so it's intimidating and it's difficult sometimes, but I think beyond everything else, it's a massive privilege to have that example to follow every day.
Okay, what happened when COVID struck? Personally, professionally, because we were meant to be here a year ago and now we're here now.
Oh, well, for me it was a bit of a roller coaster because I was in Auckland, but my court was in Wellington, the Supreme Court's in Wellington. Made the decision to stay in Auckland, and I think that was the right decision with my family. And really it was a case of running the courts from my home. And that was quite a big call because we had to reconfigure the courts into a whole new version. Justice had to continue to be administered, but we couldn't bring people into courtrooms, only in exceptional circumstances. And so we broke the courts down, shut them down, reconfigured them into a Zoom virtual world, and all in the space of about 1 or 2 weeks. So it was a remarkable period of time.
Had you been at all prepared for it? Was it uncharted territory?
We had been preparing. We had heard that a pandemic might come, but we didn't know what form it was going to take, and no one truly expected that we would go into shutdown. We were preparing for carrying on working in our usual way with reduced staff numbers and that sort of thing, but no, suddenly we were in a shutdown and it was a totally different format. It was an extreme situation to go through.
Yeah. You zoomed out like everybody?
Yes.
I mean, it's funny, you might have, had you embarked on your originally desired career, you might have been on the medical side of this whole thing.
Yes.
You wanted to be a doctor to start with, didn't you?
Yes, I did want to be a doctor. That's
What
why I've been
happened?
hanging out with Ashley.
Everyone's hanging out with Ashley, don't worry.
I know.
What happened?
I got sick. Well, even though I am, according to my family, a goody two-shoes, there is a little bit of a rebel or something about me. And I got really bored at school. At the end of the sixth form, I just couldn't take it anymore. I looked ahead to seventh form and thought, that's too hard. I couldn't go through another year. And my assessment was that it was much easier to go to law than medicine from the sixth form.
Right.
And so a very mature decision-making pattern there.
So you're a dropout, really, aren't you?
Yeah. Yes.
Done well. You're the youngest of four
I am.
siblings?
Yeah. And the older three aren't goody two-shoes.
One of them's here, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
My sister's here.
Yeah. Adrian, the
Yes.
fashion designer.
Yes. She's been dressing me since I was 8 years old.
Did she dress you tonight?
Yes. She
All
did.
right. There was a story that she once dressed you in black vinyl hot pants. Have you still got them?
No. 'Cause I haven't got them.
I'm sorry.
But it is true. That was in our punk rock stage.
Right.
That
I'll
was
say you really were a
Yes.
rebel.
Yeah. No, the rebellion probably lasted about a year.
Tell us about growing up in that family. This is the Auckland suburbs in the 60s,
Yes.
70s?
Blockhouse Bay.
Blockhouse Bay.
362 Blockhouse Bay Road.
Right.
Club 362, as we called it. Well, it was a very loud family. My mother was a daughter of Dalmatian settlers, And so we had a very enormous extended family, and there were usually a lot of people at our house here. And my father was unwell, he had multiple sclerosis, so my mother looked after him and her 4 very loud, not entirely cooperative children.
As children will want to be. Having a father who was ill like that must have affected your upbringing and the whole family dynamic, I imagine.
Yes, it did, yes. Well, I think I grew up with 2 features in my life. One is disability. I was very conscious of how hard life is for the disabled because society doesn't meet their needs. I know a young woman called Grace Stratton who's disabled, and she says it's not me who's disabled, it's society that's disabled. Because we meet only the needs of the very conventionally gifted or enabled, yeah. And the other thing is we grew up on social welfare, so which is quite an unusual background for someone in the law. It's very hard to get through law school when you come from a poor background. It's very hard to get into law school when you come from a poor background.
No silver spoon. You did rather well, though, when you got to law school for a rebel who dropped out without a silver spoon.
Look, I'm not a rebel.
Actually, before we move on to law, you did a BA LLB,
Yes.
so we shouldn't forget the arts side of it, eh?
That's right.
Shouldn't we? What were the subjects that appealed to you then?
History and political studies, yeah.
Yeah, and did that work well with law? I mean, would you say it's a good idea?
It did, yeah. It's fascinating. Well, I found law initially boring. Especially torts law. I mean, actually, I say to a lot of young lawyers that law's not really fascinating until you get out and practice it. And history was always a great love of mine, and political studies too. So it kept me engaged. The arts part kept me engaged until I got out of those dreary compulsory subjects at the beginning and got into the interesting stuff.
I do like the way you talk yourself down, Helen. You were awarded Best Undergraduate Degree.
Yes.
So you're clearly a scholar.
Yeah, probably, I suppose.
Were you ever drawn to an academic life? Did that ever cross your mind?
No. I mean, I think when you come from poverty, this is a thing. It carries on shaping your life choices. And I think if I'd come from a different background, that might have been what I was attracted to. But I was very determined to make sure that my family. Well, for one thing, I had to contribute back into the family that I was coming from, as did my sister. But also I wanted to make sure that my family, my children had advantages and didn't have to worry about money, didn't worry about food security, didn't worry about money as they grew up. So I made the decision to go into commercial practice, actually.
Yeah. Made a partner by 25. Of course, this was the 1980s, I think. So
yes, different times.
Yeah, and you were the first female partner at that firm, right?
Yes.
How was that?
Actually, it was fine. The partnership was a really great group of people. Yeah, and I think society, a lot of the glass ceilings have been smashed through by people who went ahead of me. Dame Sylvia Cartwright, Dame Sian Elias, Judith Potter. These women, Augusta Wallace, they'd smashed through a lot of glass ceilings, and those partners, the older ones, were excited to see young women coming into the law. I think they probably thought about they'd like to see their daughters do well, and they were excited to see it.
I did read an old interview with you in the Herald about being taken to dinner at the Northern Club with the other partners. Don't know if you've read this, but you weren't allowed to move around on your own. You had to be escorted in case you ran amok.
Yes.
I mean, it's amazing from this vantage, although, Helen, I don't know, the Northern Club might still be like that.
No, it's not like that.
It's really quite recent, though, isn't it?
It is quite recent. I mean, honestly, the 1980s were a complete pivot point in New Zealand society. The law we were taught was so different. Te Tiriti was hardly spoken of at law school. I think it was spoken of by David Williams, but it certainly wasn't a significant part of our course. And of course, homosexual law reform wasn't until the mid-80s. The Waitangi Tribunal had only just been established, and its jurisdiction was only just being increased so it could report on historic claims. And of course, then there was the Springbok tour, and it's hard to remember just what a pivot point the first half of that decade was.
I know for we of our generation, we were sort of born into quite interesting times, not world wars or anything like that, but a lot of those big social movements were quite a long way down the track. I sometimes feel like we were lucky we inherited things that were already about to be won.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I was talking to a group of people who were graduates of 1964 Victoria University, and I said actually they were the group who started those movements that we, rode the crest of really in the 1980s. So it was a long time. New Zealand society probably started to change in the 60s.
Well, that must have been quite interesting to watch through the lens of the law, because that's really where the rubber meets the road in many ways with those issues.
Well, yes, because in the 1840s, when New Zealand was created, the nation was created, we inherited all of English law, and actually that law stayed the same, more or less, same institutions. We even in the 1940s acquired the ridiculous red robes from England, which we chose to adopt. Stayed pretty much the same until the 1960s, when the law started to change to meet New Zealand's needs, and that really took off in the 1980s. So you do see that through the law.
So you have to keep learning.
All the time.
Yeah. In 2001, you went solo as a barrister, I
Yes.
think. Chose commercial and medical litigation.
Yes.
Why particularly those fields?
Well, I was a commercial lawyer in
that
my
would
law
help.
firm, yes. And, well, I suppose the medico-legal stuff, doctors instructed me, and I found it interesting, of course, because it allowed me to work in an area which was my parallel life that I hadn't lived. So, yeah.
Oh, right, of course.
Yeah, yeah.
Were you ambitious at that stage? You've ended up on the bench and higher. I mean, was it, at what point did you realise that might be a path?
I don't, when I was asked, it was when we were at law school, it just seemed so far beyond what a young woman could expect, because the first woman High Court judge was not appointed until after I finished my law degree. Judges were, seemed from a different world, really. They seemed very elderly. Now I'm probably the age they were. And they were male, they were all male.
Yeah.
And so you just didn't think about it. And I didn't have a particular career plan. I just always, whatever I tried to do to the best of my ability.
So 2004 was when you became a High Court judge.
Yes.
That was also when your twins were school age?
Yes.
Is that around that?
They,
I mean,
they hadn't yet got to school, I don't think.
right.
Yeah.
So these, and what I'm getting at is, these are busy years to be a High Court judge, demanding job, family. Any advice on how to balance it?
Oh, don't take on too much.
What you're meant to say is, I owe it all to my husband.
Oh, yeah. Well, actually, Martin is, he does help out a lot. Yeah.
You owe me a beer, Martin. No, seriously, I mean, it's easy to characterise someone like you as superwoman,
Yeah, I'm
And what
not
do you say to
superwoman.
that sort of stuff?
I have probably my foremost characteristic is I'm very determined, and I don't sleep an enormous amount, but I probably, I sleep a fine amount. I'm not superwoman. I'm just an ordinary person who works hard and is very determined, and also quite organised.
Aha, so that's the key.
Oh, I think there's definitely an element of time management about it all.
We were talking about this backstage. We're both cut from the same cloth, like to get to the airport early, that sort of thing.
Why put yourself under stress? Yeah.
Well, exactly. So you've now been Chief High Court Judge, sat on the Court of Appeal, Chief Justice, only the second woman to hold that role after Shana Elias.
Yes.
I'm sure you get fitted all the time with the feminist role model jacket. How do you look at it as a woman who's made this career in the law?
Look at feminism.
Yeah.
I think, yes, I'm a feminist. I believe that everybody should have the ability to achieve to their full capacity, and there shouldn't be barriers in their way. I think the role of women coming to the law has been very important, and I think what they were, as we came into the law in numbers, we were functional specialists and being at the margins. We were used to not being at the table when the conversations of power were taking place. And so women came in with some understanding about what it was to be at the margins of society, and I think that brought richness to the law, and it was a very important and well overdue thing.
Well, you've certainly brought richness to the law, and for someone who didn't actually want to be a lawyer to start with, you've now been honoured by the university. I just wanted to close by asking how that felt when they asked you.
Humbling, very humbling. And then I thought, oh no, people are going to say nice things about me.
We've tried. It's actually been very easy. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Helen Winkelmann. So your fans are leaving already. Now is time to meet our second recipient this evening.
Andrew is the loudest man I've ever met, which coming from me is a bit rich. But actually what's going on beneath the volume is a profound sense of personal responsibility, something really particular to Andrew. How can I make the world better?
From the very beginning, Andrew came across as very charismatic. He was always thoughtful and articulate, and now I think those strengths have become even stronger still.
I don't know anyone who participates more fully and more broadly and depthfully in civic society and or in the international business arena more than Andrew. And he manifests this whether you meet him in the middle of Queen Street, on the university campus, or sitting on the side of Lake Wanaka, where he and his family like to go.
Andrew is now the chair of our Industry Advisory Board, and his influence there has really been quite profound. He's introduced us to a number of the leading business people within New Zealand, and that really has allowed the department to reach out beyond what would be our normal boundaries.
Andrew has spent much of his life determined to level the playing field. He went from Onehunga High School to a Rhodes Scholarship at Oxford. But he never left behind that sense that some kids don't have it as easy as others.
I think it's fair to say Andrew and Elle have a singular commitment to New Zealand, as shown by their philanthropy.
But he never tells you about it, ever. It just happens, and it's really meaningful, and you find out about it indirectly.
I think over time we'll see Andrew continue to work away in the way he does and have quiet influence but significant influence.
I asked Helen how her COVID year has been, so I'm going to ask you too. Where were you and what happened when you hit lockdown?
Well, COVID year has been the best and the worst, I guess, in that sense. Look, it's been... I travel a lot. People often ask, where do you work? And my wife responds, he lives in a plane, he works in a plane. So actually having that gear shift of being on a plane constantly to being with family, and actually our legal home is the farm in Wanaka. So we spent lockdown in Wanaka. So for me it was the most extraordinary with family, with the nature. But then given everything that was going on, I described it as constantly working on the weekend, that you were Wanaka and then back on Zoom. So it was the best and it was the worst. But it's been, I do think for all of us, it does reset what really matters. Mm-hmm. And you cherish what we have in New Zealand. And I guess for me in those early days, being on Zoom calls and seeing the reality of what was happening to your colleagues in New York and the like, and the same with India with today. So I think there's also just an incredible sense of being so profoundly blessed.
I have a feeling that because of what's happened here, we don't quite understand how it's been for a lot of people overseas. Is that your experience from Zooming so much?
Yeah, and again, I think we've been incredibly blessed in what we have here. I think sadly the inequality of COVID, I mean, if you have a loving family, if you have a home, being locked down is not great, but it's not the end of the world. if you're living in a shoebox apartment in one of the great cities of the world on your own in poverty, it's not great. And I think that that's where we've been so blessed. But there's also a responsibility that I don't think we can also just lay back and say we've got it so good. I think we've got a responsibility to engage as well.
Let's talk about you for a minute. You've made your career in business consultancy, but actually graduated as an engineer. Do you still think of yourself as an engineer in any way?
No, look, absolutely. And there is a wonder of the engineering, the discipline. There's a fascination with making things work, with solving real problems, that I do think is magical about an engineering tradition. Now, it has its flip side. I remember arriving as Oxford as a newly minted engineering student and being determined to solve the world's problems. In my first essay in Oxford, you get to write your essay and read it to your tutor. And I was studying empirical philosophy. And my first essay was, I was determined to prove the existence of God. I thought that in an engineering position, it had confounded 500 years of tradition, had proved the existence of God. On the balance of probabilities, God was a Kiwi. If you didn't give me that, I could prove that he absolutely was not Australian. At which point my tutor tipped his glasses, looked at me and went, "So you're here to play rugby?" So it has its, I think there's something about that engineering tenacity that problems can be solved.
Yeah.
But sometimes there are limits in terms of
well, you mentioned God, so I'm going to bring it up. Now, I remember watching your father on television, Ian Grant,
Yes.
The Herd.
Yes.
Yeah. I was
Did you listen?
Well, let's talk later. So I get the feeling there was faith in your family growing up. Also, maybe a little bit of show business. How was it?
Well, I think, and look, Mum and Dad are here tonight, and my siblings and family are here tonight as well. Look, there was the thing that I am so appreciative of that I remember love the most, just an incredible, loving family, and I feel very blessed for that. I also remember a very strong sense of mission. There was the sense of, what Mum and Dad always had the sense of, we've been given something, but you've got to make something and you've got to stand on shoulders. So there was that sense of, to whom much is given, much is expected. And I don't quite know who created it. I think my sister was actually the first to say it. But it was a little bit of a sort of a family motto that if your dreams don't scare you, they're not big enough. And this lovely sense of, and it was never done in sort of an arrogant way, but I think as Kiwis, there's that lovely way when you can unlock aspiration. And Mum and Dad did that in a lovely way. A little bit of an analogy I'd give that, actually something I've been involved with a bit with conservation recently with Ngāi Tahu. And we were having a meeting, and of course the engineer and me, we were planning how we were going to accelerate predator-free and make New Zealand. And Arahia, who's the CEO of Ngāi Tahu, leaned back and goes, the way you're thinking about aspiration, not bold enough. And I go, well, what's your aspiration? And he goes, I want kakapo back on the menu. And I go, kakapo back on the menu? And it's got could we not just start with fantails or maybe, keruru or something? But Arahia's point is, I want what we achieve to be that we make kakapo so abundant that we can even have a realistic... And I guess with drawing it back, Mum and Dad just had that lovely way of unlocking aspiration in a Kiwi-esque way, but there was a sense that, you're not here to cruise.
Does this explain to some extent this decision to go to Oxford? I mean, a lot of bright young fellas that had got an engineering degree would be content with that. You completely pivoted. What made you do that?
Well, back to the seeds of aspiration, and I think it was really interesting hearing with Helen. I mean, there is something about it. I mean, I'm a great believer that humanity needs adversity. There's something about adversity that unlocks something. And I showed up at Onehunga High School. I went to a rural school originally. I didn't pay a lot of attention to what was going on. Showed up at Onehunga High School. First thing they do is give you a spelling test. And I got a spelling age of 7.5 or something and was, bottom class or close to the bottom class. Come home, utterly depressed that I'd sort of let Mum and Dad down, etc. And I remember Dad saying, "Don't worry, son, one day if you work hard, if you strive, you could become a Rhodes Scholar." And my interpretation was, "Dad, thanks, mate. I mean, you think I can just work on the roads? I mean, I think I've at least got a slightly better shot than..." So there was always a little bit of that seed that had been sown. And look, I inquired and was interested. But it was actually also the other thing that I've been very blessed with is some great mentors. And I didn't know that you reached out to Sir John Hood, but Sir John's been one of those people along the way that has just nudged and said, hey, listen, you're probably good enough. You could actually look here. And I feel a great responsibility as well that I've had several mentors like that have nudged me at the right time. And Sir John was one of those, and that's largely the reason that I really explored it.
That degree that you did, PPE, which has come to mean something else, politics, philosophy and economics. I think that's, it's a very interesting degree. It's got a very, it's quite ambitious for its students. Yeah. What impact did it have on you?
Well, the theory of the case for the PPE is that if you ask an economic question, typically there's a political underpinning. Likewise, if you ask a political question, typically there's a philosophical foundation. So there's always the striving to unpeel the onion to, well, what's really going on? What's really behind that? What really are the assumptions? And that's been the great, certainly in the profession that I am in, that we really we solve problems, but we really, before you can solve the right problem, you have to ask the right question. And I think the thing that the degree really gave me was that ability to ask the right questions and to continue to probe. But I also think engineering does that in a right. I mean, again, you can't build a bridge if you don't actually understand where the bridge is going to be and where the context is and the like. So,
did you know about McKinsey when you were a young Rhodes Scholar? Was it a natural path to end up there? Or?
Well, I came to know. I mean, look, there's two reasons for it. Actually, again, with Dad, I remember with the not-for-profit that Mum and Dad led, it grew like mad, and there were a few sort of organisational tensions. And I remember Dad reading a book called In Search of Excellence to literally sort of teach himself on what steps he might need to make. And that was kind of probably the first great business book. Well, certainly the mainstream business, and that was a McKinsey book, so I'd heard about that.
Right.
But if I'm honest, at Oxford, there was a dinner party being held. David Kirk showed up, and David Kirk, was the sort of rock star. And there were almost as many people around David as there were around Ashley tonight. And David said, listen, you should, I'm having because he was with McKinsey, so I'm having a fantastic experience. Why don't you come and have lunch in London?
Yeah.
And so that was largely it.
For people that aren't familiar with McKinsey, what's your elevator pitch? Because I know that there's a lot of history there, but how do you describe the company?
Look, I would say that it's an organisation that fundamentally believes in young talent. And the simple secret that we've found over the years, if industry trusts a 40-year-old to do something, we trust a 30-year-old to do the same thing. Likewise with a 30-year-old and a 20. So there's something about a belief that young talent with the right support is capable of a lot more.
What about the pressure side of that? Doesn't McKinsey have a sort of up or out?
Yeah, no, we do, but philosophy? There's also, I guess we have more of a sports team. If you think of, how do the best teams get the best out of humans? We do have that. So it's a demanding environment. But when we say the up or out, we've produced more chief executives than any other company on earth, so the out isn't the street. No. It's, these people go on to achieve, wonderful things. And in many respects, we're most proud, like any great university, we're actually most proud of our alumni. Yeah. In many respects, more than the people that work for us.
So this job has taken you Tokyo, London, Santiago, Auckland, Sydney, probably other places, Shanghai. That's a lot of change and upheaval, just at a personal level. Yeah. Some people wouldn't cope. How do you and the family manage?
Well, where Helen went eventually as well, I married above myself. So that was a very, very wise decision to do. But look, quite seriously with Elle made it an adventure for the family. Elle left to play tennis, in her teens to the US. So Elle's always had this incredibly agile, it's an adventure, let's make it work. I must admit, when our dogs were dog-napped in Shanghai, it nearly got to breaking point, but other than that...
Did you get them back?
We got them back, although we did discover that the people that took them ended up being we were introduced to the vigilante group that rescued dogs. We found out they were actually part of the same ecosystem. But fortunately, when we did get our dog back at 3 a.m. in the morning, they were full-service criminals because the dog was washed, cleaned, in better condition than we had done. So look, it's had its moments. But I think as a family, it's made us, we're a very tight, and particularly with the five.
5 children,
with
by
five
the way.
Kids. That,
so moving house isn't a simple operation.
Isn't it simple? But it's been an adventure, and I have to say, I mean, you know, Elle's just been extraordinary, but also the kids have been, we've made it an adventure, and I'm so proud of the global human, you know, characters and personalities that they've become as well. So.
Look, I know it's a huge topic, so 25 words or less. You've worked in China a lot.
Yep.
We hear a lot about the Chinese century. What do New Zealanders need to think about China right now?
Yep. Well, a couple of things I would say. One is, from the time of Christ until 200 years ago, China was nearly 50% of the world. So this is not the new rise of China. This is China returning to what were very long-run norms. The second thing I would say is, you know, there are eras, and when you look at China's since Deng Xiaoping, and particularly China's had some very good leaders, it's not had some such great leaders. So it's just like every other country that has some good leaders and has some not so good leaders. You can infer from that what I think about the current leadership. The second thing that I would also say about it is, don't think about China just as China. The Chinese people are almost whatever you say about China is true. It's so large, it's diverse, it's changing so quickly. And I think it's incredibly important to engage at the level of the citizen, not just at the level of the state. And as per, I think, in where I would really congratulate the Biden administration, it's going to be tricky, and we're going to have to, but with China, I don't think we can think about it as just one issue. On climate change, I think there's enormous opportunity for collaboration. On Xinjiang and human rights, we are going to have fundamental differences. On trade, I think there's opportunity. On tech decoupling, I'm concerned about where it's going. But again, I think there are, in my view, about 7 different swim lanes for which I think the settings with China need to actually be in very different places, where often we have a one-size-fits-all view of an economy. And I also think in these challenging moments, engagement should be our natural reflex, not the other way around, because then we understand each other as human. And look, some of my very best friends are Chinese. When you've got 1 billion people, the top 1% are the most extraordinary people on earth. The bottom 1%, not so much.
Will you be continuing to work in and with China?
Absolutely, but with these, across these swim lanes in very different ways, and depending on what that swim lane is.
So just personally, you've now, we've just scratched the surface of what you've achieved, but you can now add distinguished alumnus to that list. How did you feel when they told you you're going to get a medal?
Well, I'm incredibly humbled, and humbled by also those that have received it, humbled given who's receiving it alongside it, but also just enormous gratitude for what the university has given, but also enormous gratitude to my family, to my parents, to the school. Just what I do feel that I've been given an enormous amount, and this adds to that sense of blessing, but also adds to the sense of responsibility as well.
Nice. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Andrew Grant.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
So there'll be a little bit of seat shuffling when the seats arrive, but now is the time to, don't worry, now's the time to meet our third winner and Young Alumna of the Year.
When she was a kid, she was super confident. She was like a little adult, to be honest. She wasn't shy to speak up, especially amongst adults. She loved dancing. Sometimes you'd see a little crowd and I'd be here in the middle of the circle dancing, doing the Running Man.
Courtney's a very charismatic person. She's beautiful, funny, clever. She can also turn and make something very serious and extremely compelling, and then the next moment have you laughing. Her lyricism as a poet, her power as a performer, drew me to her the way it's drawn many other people.
Courtney is a great leader because she has a certain air and confidence about her that people trust and they feel comfortable with. She has a warmth that I think is really important when people look to leadership. It's not a hard thing, it's actually quite a soft and vulnerable thing.
It's really important here in New Zealand that we have a diversity of voices and that they are trailblazers, encouraging other young writers to do the same. The thing I respond to in her work is something I think many students respond to. which is its wicked humour and wicked insights.
She's achieved so much in her younger part of her life and then moving into a more mature part of her life. I think she's unstoppable, to be honest. Yeah, she's amazing.
Oh, wow. I got emotional watching that.
So did we.
Oh.
Let's all take a moment to calm down.
Thank you, Danny, for revealing my Running Man dance moves. Yeah, maybe later.
Hey, your turn. Courtney, your turn to tell us what happened to you in this past pandemic year. Was it, as a writer, did it liberate you? Was it the time to create and think and work?
I think it was a really interesting time in our household, like everyone in the country, especially those of us that have children. We have 3 boys, and at the same time too, we're also living with Auntie as well, so we had Auntie with us. And so it was this, it was an interesting time in terms of what we could do as a family. You know, you're looking at kind of 6 weeks, how will you not drive each other crazy? My auntie as well is a teacher, and she was doing her, her morning kind of huis as well with all of the different parents and students that she teaches at the kohanga where she works. And so every morning there would be these beautiful kind of children I'd hear through the house, through her Zooms, the children that she was teaching. And I found it really uplifting. At the same time, though, I'm not going to lie, as the head of Tautai, it was pretty intense, making sure that our creatives could see a golden thread through the pandemic. I was very concerned around the mental health of creatives in this country. It is already hard enough to be an artist. It is already hard enough to make a living. So the additional pressure there of having to survive through the seemingly unsurvivable was a task. Did Janet and I, my partner, make a short film, though, through that 6 weeks? We did.
What about?
Because we're just crazy, and our kids, we wrote plays with our kids. We took up baking like everyone else. Never made so many muffins. And it was a special time, but a very, very challenging time.
You mentioned that it can be a precarious existence being an artist in New Zealand, probably in most countries, unless you make it and have the big hits. Did that ever deter you? You graduated Bachelor of Arts in 2010. Did you already know, were you already doing what you were going to do by then?
I think being in the generation that I'm in, and I think I can say this with some confidence, failure is not an option in our communities. When your parents have worked as hard as ours, when your grandparents have sacrificed as much as ours have, language, culture, identity, place, when they have come here truly looking for that better life, failure for me, I didn't really have that safety net behind me like a lot of other people in my lecture theatres. I was aware all the time that success for me was not a choice, it really was the only option.
Your book, Tale of the Taniwha, is dedicated to your mother.
Yes, she's here.
Your first book, Brown Girls in Bright Red Lipstick, dedicated to your grandmother.
Yes.
What you were just saying, I am detecting a theme here, right? Tell us.
Okay, in the last book, you were going to say it to the...
I was going to let you do that.
Yep, no, my most recent book, released just last month, is dedicated to Janet, to my partner.
Three significant women in your life. Tell us a little bit about growing up on Taniwha Street.
Oh yeah, no, look, I think Tale of the Taniwha is a bit of an ode really to Taniwha Street in Glen Innes. And should you drive down there now, you will see a very different GI to the one I remember. Almost unrecognisable in some ways. And there is a lot of hope, there is a lot of change. Something really beautiful, though, is if you go there to Keano Place, where my family still live, my auntie and my cousin are here, and they are still there in GI, you will find a small street just around the corner, actually off of Keano Place, and it is Rita Meredith Street. So my grandmother now has a street in GI named after her.
That's
and
amazing.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
How did that come
Thank you, Auntie Maria. Thank you.
How did it come about?
Oh, look, the powers that be. I won't pretend to know all the ins and outs and
Sure.
how many peanut slabs it took for that to happen, but it's special to see these women honoured. It's special to see a woman like my grandmother, who worked at a denim factory, honoured in this way. And I carry that with me. I carry with me the promise and the responsibility of the family that I come from.
And does it consciously influence your work?
Definitely.
Yeah.
I think it affects my work in a sense, though, where should I be in a meeting where I feel out of my depth, or should I be, for instance, in Berlin, where I was standing at the mic about to deliver a poem to the German president, and he's standing eye to eye with me, and have this moment where I literally could just fall off the face of the earth. Everything just feels a bit crazy, and I look around. I'm digging deep for my family in that moment. When I need to realign, when I need to refocus, when I need to anchor myself. Often I can't do that just for me, but I can do it for my mother, I can do it for my brothers, I can do it for my aunties, my uncles, my nieces, my nephews. And this is the power behind me in those moments where I am often alone or I'm being asked really big questions. It's difficult overseas for any Kiwi. They always want to know, like, tell me about your farm, you know, or tell me about cycling around the South Island. These are the things that people believe about New Zealand. Being in Iowa, everyone was like, but who's taking care of your farm while you're here? And so there's that. There's, first of all, I'm a farmer. And then when you do say, no, I'm an artist, I'm a writer from this part of the world, oh, you know, tell us all about the Pacific, tell us all about Pacific people. And it is great to tell people the truth, that we are so many different things. We're really not one thing. We're incredibly layered and nuanced. And this is all we've wanted, is to be able to be our full selves.
It's interesting that you say that, like how misperceived New Zealand can be. Do you manage to get through to them? What do they end up being interested in once you've explained that you don't own a farm?
I'm like, I don't own a farm.
We don't ride to school on horseback, none of that stuff.
Oh, I'm sure you guys have heard it all as well. Like, oh, I haven't actually been to New Zealand before, but I have actually stopped in Auckland in Australia. Like, I've heard all the different things around the world. Look, I think, like all Kiwis, I'm really proud to come from New Zealand. I'm proud to come from Aotearoa, and I'm proud to be creating in this part of the world. I say the things that many people say, come down, it's a beautiful place, people are really friendly, it's cultural, it's diverse, the food's great, and I'm not lying, I actually mean all of those things.
So you're not long out of this university compared to some people. No other names mentioned. Well, at least since graduating. Were you surprised when they told you that you might be a young alumna of the year? And how did it make you feel?
I felt really overwhelmed. I still feel overwhelmed. I know a lot of the graduates who have come out of this university, and they are the most hardworking. I feel deeply honoured. So many of my peers, my good friends, could be sitting where I am, and so I hope that if they're watching, or I know that there are friends out there toasting to me right now, I really want so much to share this moment with them too. I'm only here because I've been around a lot of love, and I've been around people who have challenged me left, right and centre as well, you know, and that's what a good community does. It holds you accountable, it raises you up, but it also is honest with you too. So It does seem like a lifetime ago, though.
Yeah.
But it wasn't. It wasn't.
Well, I
too
would
long
have
ago.
to say, I think you've done those people proud. Congratulations.
Thank you, Finlay.
Courtney
Thank you.
Meredith.
Thank you, Finlay. Thank you.
So a slight change in format now, but it is time to meet our fourth recipient in a manner of speaking.
He's incredibly talented as a designer, and then that coupled with his great skill technically has meant that it's given him a real opportunity to work on some of the best buildings in the country. I really honestly believe that a lot of those buildings wouldn't still be with us without Jeremy.
I don't think there's one piece of work that's Jeremy's finest. I think it was the fact that he had an influence on so many wonderful buildings, especially historic buildings.
In Auckland, he's got the domain covered with the Auckland War Memorial Museum and its winter gardens. He is the conservation architect to the whole of the regenerated Britomart precinct, the Auckland City Art Gallery and the Civic Theatre. And he has had his hand in aiding the University of Auckland in the guardianship of many of its rich collection of heritage places.
Jeremy is incredibly kind. There's not too many architects who would agree to letting someone else come and design on their property. It's really a sign of his kind of generosity and his spirit of adventure, which I think permeates everything that he does.
He's very articulate and persuasive. He does this through his inarguable reasoning and also his wit.
You never knew where he was coming from with some of his very witty remarks, and they just broke you up sometimes. It was good fun to be with.
When Jeremy sent his apologies for tonight's ceremony and asked Peter to accept on his behalf, he included this message, which is my privilege to read. Peter has been an instrumental part of my professional career, both supportive and challenging, and we built our practice up together. He managed many of our most important and successful projects, including a number for this university. He's been a good friend, and although he has appalling taste in music, I forgive him. So, Jeremy was one of 4 distinguished alumni in 2020 who had their award ceremony unceremoniously cancelled due to an inconsiderate virus. Fortunately, though, he had already made a video acknowledging the award, which was to play at last year's event, so while he may not be with us tonight, we can still hear from him. Take it away.
Chancellor, Vice-Chancellor, fellow alumni, friends, colleagues, long-suffering clients, distinguished guests. No one is more surprised than me to be in this situation. I'm really suffering from a severe attack of imposter syndrome, but I'm not arguing. I'm a Gore boy. I'm one of a family of 7, what my dad cheerfully referred to as his large wife and family. And from early on, I would draw. I taught myself calligraphy. I copied the labels from Johnny Walker bottles, and people told me I had all the qualifications to be an architect, and I believed them. So I went to high school knowing that that was what I wanted to do, encouraged by my architect uncle Arthur and by the knowledge of my architect grandfather Louis. I left school with a Ministry of Work Study Award, which was a real bonus because my dad died the day I started university. But this gave me also my first experience of working in the real world of architecture in Dunedin. I proceeded then to Auckland, the only school of architecture in the country, combining study with duties as a housemaster at Dilworth School. I was probably the only student who consistently turned up to lectures wearing a tie. But I was determined to return to Dunedin. I wasn't going to get trapped by some Auckland bird and never be able to leave. But in the end, I met and married Anne, a Gisborne bird, and I'm still in Auckland and very happy to be here. Some of you may well have heard of Anne. So I graduated knowing my mission was to design wonderful buildings and save the world through modern architecture. However, I made the mistake of returning to the school to do a master's degree. I had become preoccupied with the lovely villa that Anne and I bought nearly 50 years ago, and I felt the need to understand its origins and how such houses came to populate our towns and suburbs. And this was eventually published, and I was immediately pigeonholed as an old house architect. It was a mixed blessing because it brought me lots of work on old buildings, but not much in the way of modern design. So I made a virtue of necessity, and this has become a way of practice for me as one of what was then a very small group of such practitioners. I was fascinated with both the philosophical questions raised by the preservation of the architectural heritage and the brute mechanics of actually doing this. I've been especially interested in how new buildings can be fitted gracefully into our established urban landscapes, and equally what actually constitutes our built heritage, and the importance of retaining not only the best, but equally representative examples of the ordinary, because these too are an important part of the legacy. I became preoccupied with the language of conservation, with finding an appropriate language to persuade and bully others into a point of view. And this led eventually and inevitably to the need to proselytise and generally make a nuisance of myself. And ultimately I ended up in court, the Environment Court. Not a particularly happy place for a conservation architect. But here I am in my happy place, surrounded in my work by an accomplished team and 2 partners who give me enough rope to hang myself. They also generously indulged me in my second career, shared with Anne, another form of conservation in a valley north of Gisborne. Here, we're encouraging nature to take its course in an effort to recover the intrinsic beauty and integrity of a wonderful landscape, and to repopulate this with the indigenous plants, insects and birds, and to heal the wounds of decades of neglect. In an unexpected way, our careers have converged here, and as I said earlier, it has really become a second career. The honour that the university does me acknowledges my activities of the past 45 years as an architect, and it is an honour. I thank the university, and I'm proud to share this occasion with 3 other remarkable alumni, but I'm still surprised. Thank you.
So you're going to shuffle in a minute. Great. As I mentioned before, of course, there are 4 other distinguished alumni this year, but there were only 3 others when Jeremy recorded that. So on that note, let's meet our 5th and final recipient tonight, possibly one of the people we can thank for being able to gather together tonight in the first place.
If I could have, I think I would have awarded Ashley a halo for patience for the way that he managed to deal with repeated questions day after day without losing his equanimity.
Lovely guy, engaging, thoughtful, well-informed. You know, Ashley knows his stuff really deeply. I can't think of anybody else in New Zealand who knows public health as well as he does.
I met Ashley on the first day of our Masters in Public Health postgraduate program. I think anyone in public health is usually a bit of an idealist. He was savvy, politically astute, and clearly cut out to be a leader.
And he's a very good actor, talented, believable, enjoyable, with a spark. Most of the plays that he was in, and he took the you might say, the juvenile lead, usually with a romantic partner. I'm not at all surprised these days that he's become a bit of a heartthrob as a result of the COVID exposure.
I was getting some fresh air one day and I saw someone sitting on a park bench who had a tattoo of Ashley Bloomfield on their calf muscle, quite large and quite striking, but also quite accurate. I remember thinking, you know, you have reached a very special place in the Kiwi psyche when people are permanently applying you in ink to your leg. But that's what Ashley had done, just by being himself, by being so clear and so calm and so reassuring, so factual, exactly when New Zealand needed it.
Well, It was just luck of the draw that you came out last. But how was your pandemic year?
Where do you want me to start?
No. Look, I know you've been asked this many times in different ways, but in your wildest dreams or imaginings, or even in your professional planning, did you imagine one day you might be fronting a national response to a global pandemic?
I hadn't put that in my career planning, I dare say, and there were many nights, especially early on, where I woke up thinking, I've only got a 5-year contract, and this is a 1 in 100-year pandemic. What did I do wrong here?
Seriously, though, were there sleepless nights on those early days?
There were certainly. I talk about waking up at 3 in the morning, night after night, in a cold sweat, literally dreaming COVID-19, and it was just the uncertainty and the hugeness of it all, and that huge leadership challenge of very little or limited information, but huge decisions to advise on. And interestingly, I was reading some months back a newspaper piece. Brad Hazard, who's the Minister of Health in New South Wales, a very experienced long-term career politician who very rarely gives interviews, but he described exactly that same feeling, that anxiety of the first few weeks and just seeing this thing unfold, and huge decisions to be made. And both Australia and New Zealand, I think, were countries that acted so quickly and courageously early on, and it's served us well.
A lot of people have said that the times throw up the man, and it's really kind of fortunate that you were in the job at the time. You have that public health background. What drew you to public health as opposed to another medical discipline in the first place?
Well, a little bit by a process of elimination. I enjoyed my clinical work, I really did. I loved my time doing surgery, and I did some general practice. I really enjoyed that. But I had a close friend, one of my best friends through medical school, Andrew Wong, who went into public health, and he sort of tipped me off about it and said, I think this might be something you'd really enjoy. So I thought, okay. And actually at the time I was working for a well-known surgeon here at Wellington Hospital, Jim Shaw, and I was a house surgeon. Interestingly, his registrar at the time is now the chief medical officer working at the Ministry of Health, Andrew Connolly. We're both Tawa boys, I might add. But Jim joked about it with me, and he said, this will be easy, this interview for this training program. They'll take you down to Wellington. He said, you'll walk into the room and there'll be this black box, and they'll say, how do you do a hearing test? So that was his idea of public health, was, you'll become a hearing test doctor. So when I got back, actually he was very generous. He said, who was on the interview panel? And I went through and he said, I know them. Do you want me to give them a call? I wasn't sure if that was a good or a bad idea, but anyway, it was sort of a bit of a process of elimination, but I've never looked back.
Tell us a little bit about Ashley Bloomfield, medical student. What are your overriding memories of med school?
A great deal of fun. I had 2 years at Grafton Hall. First year, of course, down on the main campus, so we used to walk down every day as a group, walk back every day as a group. Occasionally, most days we'd stop by the pub for a beer on the way back. I loved my time, and then, of course, at the medical school itself. And in the second year, I was actually a social rep with Andrew Wong, who I mentioned earlier on, so we were responsible for toga parties, cocktail parties.
This is what I was getting at.
Yeah, general good fun on Friday nights at medical school. It wasn't me who turned the fire alarm on that night. But, medical school, and of course in those days the class size was only about 100 in each year, right. And so it was like a big family. And you also knew people in the years ahead and below, and so it was a very close-knit group, really.
Is this when the acting started?
Well, it did actually, because one of the things, and I just realised, of course, the Maidment Theatre has now been demolished, but I was certainly a keen participant in all the medical school reviews through medical school, and my first year it was in the Auckland Grammar Theatre, but after that we used to pack the Maidment out, I'd like to think, night after night.
If that picture of you wearing a crown gets out, it's all over. You know that, don't you? A lot of people in this room and in this country would probably say that you'd have made a very good GP. You've got a nice bedside manner, literally. Just to happen that the whole nation's in bed.
Not at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I hope. Yeah.
It was, anyway. But what's been spread across the top of your medical career, of course, is leadership, and leadership of very complex bureaucracies. At what point did you think that, A, you might be interested in doing that and not just being a practitioner? And what have been the challenges of really taking those kind of roles on?
Yeah, so my wife Libby and I, we met at medical school, got married in our final year. We decided to shift to Wellington for 6 months at the end of my public health training, and we're still there. And quite early on in my time at the ministry, I was offered opportunities really to lead. And with that gift of being given that opportunity was also the challenges and the points in time where you feel that real imposter syndrome, and I certainly felt that last year as well. It's that sense of, oh goodness me, am I up for this? Can I do this? That sense of self-doubt, which is, as I've found out, quite normal. And actually I like to talk about that now with young leaders especially, and talk about, yes, I get anxious, I get stressed, I feel self-doubt. And many of them feel very reassured by that, because they say, well, I really aspire to be a senior leader, but I didn't think I could because I doubt myself or I get anxious. And I said, welcome to the world of being a leader. So leadership's a real journey, and I guess last year was just another huge part of that journey, and an opportunity to learn a lot about yourself and also a lot about leadership, and I've been enjoying sharing some of those learnings over the last year too.
You worked for a year at the WHO in Geneva, and I've heard you, well, I recall you joking about the kind of bureaucracy you discovered there would make our Ministry of Health look pretty good. Speaking of leadership, I mean, what did you learn from the World Health Organization and the scale of that?
Well, I learned a couple of things. First of all, I learnt how fortunate I am to work and to live and work in New Zealand, and particularly as part of the New Zealand Public Service. You know, this is one of the things, a big lesson for me working at the WHO was, and looking at health systems in countries around the world, is public services, including health services, rely on really strong governance and on strong public services, and also a non-corrupt public service. And this is something that I had completely taken for granted till I went and worked, not so much in the WHO, because it's a very good, strong public service as well, albeit a larger and somewhat more lumbering one. But you certainly look around the globe and you see that, and it made me realise the lack of corruption and that deep sense of service and commitment in this public service we have in New Zealand is just something we can't take for granted. And New Zealanders have seen it over the last year. I think that's one of the things that's given me most pleasure, is New Zealanders have seen the public service at its best, that it is deeply committed, it is agile, and it's work that's neither usually noticed or known about, and it's been visible, not just the work of the Ministry of Health, but right across the public service. So that was a huge lesson for me.
Not that I want to, rush on to the next global pandemic, but have we, not just New Zealand, but I mean, you were talking about how certain bureaucracies aren't up to it, and the WHO obviously is trying to run bureaucracy on a global scale. Are you relatively hopeful, slightly hopeful, that if this happened again, we might be better at it?
Well, I'll put my cards on the table. I'm pathologically optimistic, but I have great hope, and we must have hope here. The WHO is a fantastic institution, and whilst it can be very frustrating working there, or even if you're at one of the member states and attending some of the big global governance meetings they have, its success relies on the support and the funding that it has from member states. And I think the pandemic has been a huge wake-up call, and we've seen a number of reports done, one co-chaired by Helen that has pointed out that actually it's not, if WHO has been unable to do its work as effectively as it needs to, then it is up to member states, including Aotearoa New Zealand, to step up and actually enable it to do so, to fund it properly, to govern it properly, to enable it properly. And that, I hope, is what will come out of this pandemic.
Hope.
Great. I'm very full of hope.
You're an optimist and you're a hopeful person. I wanted to ask you about being raised in the church, and still going to church, I believe. When I watched the 1 o'clock press conferences, at one point it struck me you have a church background, and so does Jacinda Ardern. She, raised in different religions, but there was some sense of purpose or service or commitment to community that was coming through. Now, I don't want to speak for you, but where do you put that side of your life?
Yeah, so you're right. I certainly grew up. I've got a fairly eclectic background in the church. I grew up in the Baptist church. I went to a Presbyterian school, and we're now involved in the local Anglican church, although I should say I'm a fairly intermittent attender. My wife is a much more regular and committed attender than I am. So saying, I think the church had a deep impact on the values that have underpinned my life and my work, and hopefully that goes beyond, well, it does go beyond my work. But certainly last year, one of the things that became really apparent to me was when you're in a situation like a global pandemic, where there's not much you can control about your context, it's the thing you can always control is how you respond, how you behave, how you come across. And of course, our behaviours are rooted in our values. So I've been reflecting a lot on what are those values that really underpin, the way that I've tried to lead myself and the organisation and the context over the last year. And the three ones that are really key for me have been kindness. So again, fully paid up member of the Kindness Club. I'll put that on the table. You don't need a pandemic to be kind to each other, please. Kindness actually underpins all the world's great religions. It's about hospitality and generosity to others without any expectation of reciprocity. And one of the things I've had to get used to over the last year is walking down the street and, well, first of all, people recognising me, but sometimes people wearing T-shirts with my face on them.
I was going to ask you about this.
On one of the versions of those T-shirts, it says underneath, "The Curve Crusher." And as I like to say, actually, I didn't crush the curve. We crushed the curve with our collective kindness. The call to action that was extended by the Prime Minister was, stay home, save lives, be kind. It's a very different message from stay home and look after yourselves. It was an invitation for us to act in each other's interests, and by goodness, we showed last year that we could, that it was important to us, and look what happened when we did. And my great hope again is that we can extend that to those other great challenges that we all, I think, aspire to do better on as a nation. Child poverty, homelessness, environmental sustainability, and indeed global warming. We must play a role in beating that.
So finally, you're back at Auckland University, where it all started. You've had a big year. How's this feel?
Well, it's humbling, actually. It feels, it's a real honour to be receiving this award, and I guess I had achieved one of my career goals, which had only recently become a career goal, which was to spend time as the Director General of Health. It's a wonderful privilege to be a senior public servant, and indeed to be involved in helping lead what I genuinely believe is a great healthcare system, and I've worked at WHO, so I've had a chance to compare it to others. So this is really just quite unexpected, and it's a wonderful privilege, and it has reminded me once again of the time I spent here, not just my undergraduate degrees, but then doing the Masters in Public Health. And you saw Chris Bullen up there, and he's right, we met on our first day of doing our Masters in Public Health, and he was an amazing colleague, and again I was privileged to do my Masters with people who were intelligent and thoughtful, and I had lecturers who were the same, and it really did set me up for a career in public health and in the public service, and I've just loved that opportunity.
Well, I guess I probably speak for many when I say we hope you stick around a little bit longer. Congratulations, Ashley Bloomfield. So we're nearing the end of this stage of proceedings, and I'd like to thank those who began for their patience. You've been very quiet and well behaved over there.
Are you surprised?
Well, she's a rebel. I thought, look, it's a little bit like having a brains trust up here. We have the law, we have the arts, we have health, we have business. We talked about the past and we've talked about the present, but not so much about the future, a little bit. So I would like to just wrap up really by asking each of our recipients a little bit about what they see as their next big challenge, be it personal or professional. So I'll just leave it at that, and Helen, it's your turn to talk again. So how would you answer that question?
Well, I'll answer it in my role as Chief Justice, and so for the courts, I suppose. The challenge for the courts, in a way, is it's a continuous challenge, but I think it's really come into focus in the last probably 10 years as New Zealand really has found its place on its own terms. It understands that it can come up with its own solutions, and I think we saw that most particularly during the pandemic, but we really do have a sense that we are now a Pacific nation. And I see that being built on the style of our courthouses and the way we do business increasingly is drawing upon the two founding cultures of this nation. And you saw it in the photographs of us at my swearing-in with the robes that have the tukutuku panels on the gown, which rejects we got rid of our silly old Victorian red robes with the long wigs. And that's just the get-up, but I think it's actually, it's more than that that's going on in the law, because I think what else is also happening is we're starting to weave a law which serves all New Zealand and which brings in the cultures of the many cultures of our nation, and also which attempts to serve not just those who've got money and the privilege to have really great legal representation, which actually tries to serve everybody in our country, so it lifts them up. So it serves the vulnerable, the disabled, the poor, not just the few.
Brilliant. Andrew. Yes. Now, as a McKinsey man, you must be thinking about the future all the time. What's on your mind?
Well, look, I mean, I think we live in the most dynamic and interesting period in human history. Simple. Why? We live in the midst of what many people call the fourth industrial revolution, or call it the future of work, but where we've got this new wave of technologies that fundamentally are shaping the world much more fundamentally than we've seen in the previous three. I mean, if you compare this industrial revolution with the first, by most measures it's 3,000 times more intense, the scale and the pace of what we're living through. I think COVID has only amplified and accelerated what's going on with that. When I look at what it takes to make society a more human place, for us to solve the problems of climate change, of inequality, of poverty, I'm excited. I think New Zealand has an opportunity genuinely to be that reference case nation in the same way we've been with COVID. The values that Ashley talked about, I think, are the values that are going to matter even more. We've got this incredible wave of human capital, Māori and Pacifica human capital, that's coming on stream in a way we've never seen before. So I'm, like Ashley, an absolute optimist that I think we can be. As a nation, we've actually seen it early, and I think we've articulated the importance of the future of work early. The worry I have is I don't think it's a birthright that it gets handed to us. And I do have that Sir Peter Jackson phrase in my mind that as New Zealanders we saw it early, but it ended up being a buck short and a day late. And I really worry that this is, I think, a moment that we have as a nation to really address some of the challenges that we've had. I think the future of work gives us that. I think we've seen it early. I think we're doing many of the right things. I think we've got the values that position us well, but it's not a birthright, and we have to invest appropriately, and we've got to seize it with both hands.
Thank you. Okay. Well, I think you just got permission to redesign the courthouses anyway, so your works.
Can we tender for that? Some great artists who love to be involved. Look, I'm going to be honest. The future, I'm thinking radical self-acceptance. Radical self-acceptance within Pacific communities, Pacific arts, Indigenous leadership, being very, very proud of who we are and where we are, and meeting ourselves where we are too. I am so done with conversations around who is enough, who goes back home enough, who knows the dances and the languages enough, who has the right. I really want to be a part of extending that we all have a place on the waka, that we are all in this together. I am still on my language learning journey. I am still that girl in the mirror before a big event, practicing my seva straight up. I'm still asking my aunties, for bits and pieces of information. I will ring my mother and ask her, remind me again of my islands, remind me again of my villages, remind me where I come from. But where we are going, we will get there together, and it starts with accepting ourselves, it starts with accepting one another and unlocking all of this abundance between us in terms of love. Wow, how much love we have. But man, we really need each other now more than ever. The wokeness that is around us all, I know everyone's seen it. There's a turning tide here where people suddenly want to invite us around the table. They want to hear our ideas, they want to be connected to our communities, and I'm really excited about that. But the place where we belong is together around a table of our own making, and the future for me and the conversation I want to be a part of and the room where I want to sit is that one.
What a lovely answer. Now there's big changes coming in the health system, we know that. Hope you're not too tired. What's on your mind?
Well, yes, there will always be change ahead, and the world will be a different place post-COVID, and COVID will be with us and a big part of our reality for the next few years. What have we learnt about ourselves in this last year? Well, first of all, we've learnt that we're competitive. People ask me, how was it we got New Zealanders to do what was asked of them in the lockdown? And there were a couple of reasons. One is I think people understood the why. We had taken them on a journey, but by the time the Prime Minister said on the 23rd of March, in 2 days' time, we need you to all stay home to look after each other. And no one said why. They said, okay, what do you want us to do? But the other reason that people did that was because they got a sense, hey, heck, we're not just going to crush this virus, we're going to crush it better than everyone else. This is the new Rugby World Cup. So there were two things that came out of it. First of all, we refound the fact that actually we are built a society that is built fundamentally on fairness, that if we are kind to each other, if we act in each other's interests, we can achieve great things, and we need to retain that. We need to remain agile, because it is a future that I can't even see next week. Who knows when the next case is going to pop up? I can tell you what it's like day in, day out to not know if your phone's going to ring and say there's a case somewhere. It hangs over us the whole time. But what we need to be thinking about is what is it we need to take from what we've learned in this last year and really anchor who we want to be as a nation from here. And the very first thing, someone's asked me already, what's the best thing we can do to prepare for the next pandemic? I'll tell you what it is. The best thing we can do is address the deep inequities in our society, and that will be to the benefit of us all, and then we will be best placed to take advantage of what Andrew's talked about. We will be able to be at peace with who we are and create our own table, have our own conversation and be comfortable with that. Our court system, our education system and our health system will be better for everybody, and as a nation we will be better off.
You keep talking like that, and that guy from your intro video is going to get his other calf tattooed.
It was a woman, mate.
Was it? Okay, I stand corrected. Now look,
and it's not my wife.
I want to thank all of our winners for being so open and candid this evening, from one largely undistinguished alumnus to 5 very distinguished ones. It's been a rare pleasure. And as always, it's been a privilege and great fun to host this event. I hope you've enjoyed it too. Now, please remain seated after our guests leave. There will be a dance performance to conclude tonight's celebrations. But for now, would you one more time please show your appreciation for the University of Auckland Distinguished Alumni for 2021. Please.